Hello and welcome to this episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today in the studio I have Marcus Clover. Marcus is the co-founder of Energy Revolution Ventures, or ERV, a global energy tech venture firm focused on accelerating the transition from molecules to electrons, from carbon-heavy to renewable electrochemical energy systems. ERV is tackling climate through deep technical expertise with 7 PhDs, 3 professors and in-house engineering capability, and a venture builder arm, ProSemino, that turns research into real companies, with lab infrastructure built in partnership with British Land. Their core belief: the energy transition is not just about net zero. It's about building a better, more efficient world. And that requires the right tech in the right part of the value chain with the right business model and the right kind of capital. In today's episode, we talk about how they went from fuel cell technology to funds, how hardware companies only have 2 ways to win in the market, cost or functionality, the 2 megatrends in energy beyond decarbonisation, energy demand, as well as the growth of AI, as well as the price of electrons reducing 10x or more in the last 10 years.
The price of solar and wind plummeted.
How we will see homes and cities starting to be used as power stations.
You're going to see homes and cities start to become used as power stations.
How 50% of the technologies to do energy transition already exist, and how they went from benchtop to 20 kilowatts in 12 months, taking the earliest of inventions through to commercialization.
How can we commercialize this technology faster?
And how, as the cost of compute collapses to the cost of energy at some point, what might happen next?
The cost of compute is going to collapse to the cost of energy over time.
And how collaboration in the global south is leading them to become the energy superpowers of the future.
Places like Morocco, Chile, the Middle East, those are going to be the new energy superpowers of the future.
Right, let's get straight into it. Hi guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I just thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish, I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate, like, and subscribe wherever you listen, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. It really helps boost our presence. And of course, if there's anything you want to talk to me about, be it the podcast or anything else, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or X. I'm always happy to have a conversation. Right, let's get back into it. Marcus, great to have you here in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining. Let's start with kind of the origin story. So what brought you, a chemical engineer, and your co-founder, a PE venture operator, together to launch an electrochemistry-focused VC? I mean, what was the sort of problem that you saw in the climate energy space that made you think this needs a different kind of fund?
Sure. I mean, I straight out of uni worked as an engineer. Mm-hmm. So employee number 1 in an aerospace startup based out of Cambridge. Okay. And I, built powertrain technology at that firm. Did that for many, many years. Understood what it was like to sort of innovate, procure technology in this deep tech space. Did it in the automotive sector as well. And when I was an engineer, I sort of saw firsthand like how much innovation was happening in the energy sector. Mm-hmm. And on like a personal note, when I first started as an engineer, I was working on basically fuel cell technology. Mm-hmm. And if your audience don't know, the way that works or produces power is you feed a fuel cell hydrogen and air. It reacts those things together, creates pure water and high electrical power. It's a small box, makes no sound, and the water that comes off the back end of it is drinkable. Yeah,
potable water, yeah.
It's almost like magic. And I became completely enamored with this concept. That why are we sort of using these like very complicated mechanical machines? Fossil fuel engines are extremely inefficient. We're throwing away about 70% of the energy that we actually put into them. And looking at this, and then also if you look at like EV vehicles, which are actually very simple mechanically, very efficient, have similar range now to automotive vehicles. It was super clear.
And cost of production has like dropped significantly. You go out, I was in Westfield the other day. looking at the BYDs, and like you can buy one for 18,000 pounds, I think, or 20,000 pounds.
Yeah,
it's
cost is plummeting.
Yeah.
And it was super clear to me that electricity and electrons being as a carrier of energy, rather than digging up fossil fuels and burning them in engines, was a way better product for the energy sector. And I mean, everyone at home can do an example of why it's a better product. Your engine at home on your car, if you have a combustion car, not an EV yet.
I have an EV.
But in your combustion car, which you probably used to own,
yes,
it vibrates.
Yeah.
It creates loads of heat.
Yeah.
That is wasted economic value.
Yeah.
That is just being thrown away. And the same argument can apply to other areas of electrifying industry and our world. And so that's what got me really excited about it. Really how it came to be is, with my brother, we've been doing some angel investments in the energy space. Some of those did very well. And so myself and two of my partners, Grant, who you mentioned, another guy called Hayden, we came together as 3 operating partners, and we were backed by 5 family offices on day one.
Got it.
We said, let's go after this space in energy transition. So we started building the thesis, trying to think about, okay, what sort of companies we're going to invest in, which parts of the value chain do we want to play in. We built a really great pipeline, and then all of a sudden, I got introduced to a guy called Dan Brett, and he's a professor of electrochemistry. And he said to me, hey, Marcus, I'm launching a new, what he called an incubator back then, to try to speed up the commercialization of deep tech for universities.
Yeah.
I said, hey, that's funny. We're going to do an energy transition fund focusing on deep tech, and we have exactly the same thesis of you in electrochemistry. Dan and 2 of his colleagues who are also professors are some of the leading experts in this space. And we were like, we got to do this together.
Yeah, it makes sense.
We got to team up and do this together. And that's when the partnership between us and ProSemino was born. And since then, it's just been, it's gone from strength to strength. And now we have a venture builder with them, and we've also built our seed Series A fund. Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the whole economics of electrons, if I can put it that way, right? In a second. But one of the things I'm super intrigued by, right? So with an 18, I mean, like your first one was 18 mil, your second fund is going to be larger, but the sort of technology that you're talking about, deep tech, hard problems, right? Like, and in the hardware space as much as the software space, tend to be like quite capital intensive. So like how what is your approach there, right? Because if you invest at pre-seed with relatively small checks, or even at seed with relatively small checks, like there's a limit to how far those sort of businesses can, or those sort of startups, there's a limit to how far they can go on that initial check, right? And what I've tended to see is the pools of capital that are required to kind of really build those into something substantial can be quite difficult to attract, and often are reliant on kind of government funding or subsidies or that sort of stuff. So like, can you just kind of explain a little bit about how you see that sort of early stage investing in this sort of technology?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing to be super clear on our thesis is, first of all, we back deep IP companies. So when you back a new hardware solution, there's only 2 ways a hardware company has a right to win in a market. Okay, the first is I can do what you can do, but I can do it cheaper.
Yeah.
So it's a cost argument. Or I can do something you can't do. I offer the customer functionality which you can't do. I'll give you 2 examples. One is we backed a point source carbon capture company, about 3 times cheaper than the incumbent solution. So that's a pure cost argument. We did a battery materials company out of the US. They take existing batteries and then make them safe and also structural. So say similar cost and performance, but now the batteries have a safety element and a structural element normal batteries don't have. So that's a functionality argument.
So I mean, just again, in the interest of clarity, so you're talking safety, not post-disposal. You're talking in like safety whilst being used. So avoiding combustion or something along those lines, presumably, or overheating or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can take one of their batteries,
yeah,
you put it through a shredder and nothing will happen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
don't do that with your phone battery.
Sure. I'm not planning on it anytime soon.
As
Although
an
if it
example.
annoys me any further, as it has been doing this week, I might have to consider doing that. Okay, so that's the functionality argument, right? So that's an improvement on existing technology. Yeah.
And then you asked a question about like capital. And I think a lot of it comes, first of all, I think for really good business models that have a right to win in either cost or performance, there is a lot of capital looking for these solutions. So there is actually a lot of follow-on capital available in both Series A, Series B, and beyond. I think the other thing as well is you've got to also ensure that the business model is venture backable.
Yeah, of course.
So, I would much prefer to invest in sort of a modular tech solution with high value capture on highly defensible margins than going for a fully integrated, battery project developer.
Sure.
An example which maybe people have heard about a lot in the news is there's a lot of hype around geological hydrogen.
Yeah.
So where they dig hydrogen out the ground. Looked at a lot of companies in this space. And to be honest, most of them are just effectively oil and gas exploration plays.
Sure.
So what is this?
Fracking by another name.
What is this company going to become? It's probably going to become an oil and gas exploration
or be
company.
acquired by an oil and gas company. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's not really the type of project that our capital is going to go after.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, again, and we'll talk about this more further into the podcast, but I think, it's not as if energy as a sector hasn't been, incredibly important for the last 150 years, right? If not more. The constant strive to look for cheaper, better, more efficient solutions has always been there. I think what's interesting at the moment is this kind of growing narrative around energy transition, right? But there are still sort of things that are still missing, right? So you said this is less about kind of net zero, more about efficiency, as you mentioned, scale and the economics, as I said, of electrons. So can you unpack that for us? Like, where are we in this journey? Because it feels like, okay, how come we're only now waking up to, maybe we have better options for fuel and power than oil and gas, as you said. And what do you think the next decade looks like? And is that kind of tipping point for renewables closer than we think? I mean, like, obviously, again, Elon Musk has, for whatever reason, been in the news quite a lot recently for various things. But obviously, Tesla is very clearly has done more to kind of promote the argument for renewable and for electrification of transport and so on than probably any other company. I think it would be fair to argue whatever your sort of thoughts about the individual, but I mean, for 150 years, we went from choosing AC versus DC current, then oil and gas exploration. We fought wars in order to secure oil and gas. So why has this become of the moment now? Has there been a step change in the technology? What's changed, I guess, is the question.
I think there are like two fundamental megatrends, which are really at the crux of why energy is a really interesting place to invest right now. And it goes way beyond decarbonisation and carbon. The first is global energy demand is set to rise by between 2 and 3 times globally, driven by two main factors. One is emerging economies. Yeah. Energy is critical to human prosperity. As a nation's wealth and prosperity increases, their energy demands increase. Yeah. Heat your home, hot water, drive a car. Yeah. So that's the first one. But the second one is new energy intensive industries like AI and data centers. Yeah, I got it. Electricity consumption recoupled to US gross GDP growth for the first time in the last 20 years. Wow. Recently. People think because due to artificial intelligence growth. Yeah. So that's the first thing. There's a growing market for energy demand. The second one is the price of electrons and products which use electrons, like EVs, got way cheaper, way faster than anyone expected. The price of solar and wind plummeted. Battery cost has gone down, 10x or more in the last 10 years. And so this sort of new product, which is going head to head with fossil fuels, is becoming, in many places in like power generation, solar, it's cheaper to build new solar than to keep operating existing coal-fired power stations
Yeah.
in many parts of the Western world, as an example.
And just, again, digging into that a bit further, what has driven that reduction in the cost of electrons?
Falling price of solar PV,
Yeah.
falling price of wind turbines, basically because they got bigger,
Right.
and the manufacturing supply chains got way more mature.
Yeah.
And the electrons just getting way cheaper.
And in the face of that, and sorry, this this is kind of how my brain functions at times. But like, so we think about the UK or the US. We have a lot of NIMBYism, and people don't want these sort of turbines and generators in their backyards, to an extent, understandably. But at the same time, if that's going to drive down the price of energy, which has a direct impact in their wallets, etc. I've never understood the argument, against building this, because obviously it is future proofing, right? It is energy resilience. Secondly, it lessens the cost as you've just described. But thirdly, it actually is a pro-growth kind of agenda, right? Like this is how you also create jobs and create new industries. Certainly in the UK, where we've had massive decline in more traditional industries, right? So, what do you think is the barrier to kind of this stuff being adopted more widely? I mean, is it just purely kind of political expedience around does someone want a wind turbine close by their house?
So the NIMBYism argument is an interesting one.
Yeah,
and often you only find NIMBYs in stable, democratic countries, where they live a very peaceful and calm life, and they have everything they need.
Yeah, countryside, pub, post office sorted. Yeah.
Say there's some kind of big geopolitical event, your energy price spikes, and you start to have rolling blackouts across your country.
Yeah.
Are you really going to be worried about the wind turbine outside your window?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
So if people realize that we take so much of our energy for granted, you don't want your energy price bill to go up, even 10%. It's a real big impact on most people's wallet.
Yeah.
And also, if you have a grandparent, you realize how important energy is in winter when their heating goes down, and how you really don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to do a way better job of storytelling.
It's a narrative always, right?
Way better.
This is always the problem. It's like, how do you explain how this will benefit rather than what is the obvious, not cost, but kind of negative or con around the infrastructure. And so where are we? So construct that for me, for the audience, construct that narrative. Where are we today? Where are we going in the next 10 years, do you think?
I mean, we're at a really interesting point. I mean, there was Cleantech 1.0, which happened sort of like 2008, 2009. And there was a big investment and a big crash, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. The markets weren't ready. The technologies weren't cheap enough. The policy frameworks weren't designed properly. Then about 2019, 2020, there was a huge wave of new investment driven by much better policy support, even in places like the US, very strong here in Europe. And then also just like continued cost declines of these technologies. It is just incredible how much cheaper sort of solar got, and how much better batteries got over that time period. And there was a huge wave of investment, huge amount of excitement in 2020 around sort of sustainability, carbon price, decarbonisation. It's going to be the next big thing. Then at about 2022, interest rates spiked. Yeah. Okay. And in a heavy capex environment,
I was going to say very capital intensive. Yeah.
There was a lot of projects which got hurt bad. There was a lot of negative sentiment about hydrogen. Only about 15% of the projects made it to FID. So we would
just explain FID for the
final investment decision. If you're building a new project, you do a huge work of engineering and feasibility studies to figure out how much the thing's going to cost. Yeah. And then before you actually commit the majority of the capital, you have to pass called final investment decision,
which is presumably a DCF on like, is this going to make us money?
Exactly. And now we're in a phase in sort of the climate investing space where there's been a much bigger focus on fundamentals and economics and business models that make sense and aren't propped up on some kind of sustainability or ESG argument. So that's where we're at in like the cycle. Where we're at in terms of like technology deployment, we're deploying solar at like an unbelievable rate globally. Like China last year deployed more solar than the US did in its entire history. It's like mad. EVs in many, many places are now reaching that sort of S-curve adoption.
Yeah. I mean, China, and again, this is going back a few years, so my dates may be wrong, but they were promoting full EV adoption by 2030, I think.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing for me is, and I've said it on this podcast before, the narrative you see on Twitter or X or LinkedIn or wherever is that, China's behind us, they can only nick technology, they can't, they can't create their own, they can't build their own. I mean, having been to China many, many times in my life, I just find that just a ludicrous argument. Like China is very clearly able to do a lot of this stuff cheaper, better, quicker, faster, and has the will, well, not the will, but the political ability to just make it happen rather than wait for someone to give them approval, as it were.
Oh, absolutely. No, they are very innovative. They're investing a huge amount in this area. And need to work with them, not against them.
Yeah,
in my view,
100%. So, and where do you think we're going to be sort of 10 years from now? Paint the utopian or dystopian, like you choose your own ending. But like, what do you think the next 10 years will look like?
I think you're going to see a big rollout of battery technologies. You're going to see continued deployment of renewables. You're going to see homes and cities start to become used as power stations. So good example is there is a project here in the UK called Zero Homes, where they're basically retrofitting existing homes with solar, batteries, heat pumps, etc. And then they're using those homes as power stations. And they provide both, when there's excess solar from all those homes, they feed it back into the grid. They also provide grid flexibility with using their battery backups as well.
Interesting.
So you're basically you're using, residential sector as now a part of the power station for your grid.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see more of that.
And that mirrors actually what was happening a while ago, where you had data centers essentially being built under care homes and warehouses and various sort of other places to utilize both the dead space, but also there was a heat efficiency argument as well, or something. I can't remember exactly now. But okay, so taking your point around, homes and cities starting to be used or either as or part of the kind of power generation, power story, walk me through like the UK from that perspective, because it feels like we just don't have, I don't know whether it's capability, will, or the right infrastructure or the right political leadership, or I don't really know. It's not something that I've necessarily paid enough attention to, but it feels like if we attempted to do this, we would struggle. Or do you think that's not the case?
So I think I'm seeing it actually happening.
Okay.
It looks at small scale now, but these things always start at small scale, and then all of a sudden you get some kind of exponential adoption curve. It's happening with heat pumps. The UK wants to be a third of all homes installed with heat pumps in just a few years. There's some really innovative policy frameworks around that to incentivize it, also to educate installers to be able to install these heat pumps better and make it efficient.
Yeah, we work with a company very much in the heat pump space. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. The wind in this country is excellent. We have excellent wind power. We need to just deploy a lot more battery tech, and that is happening. There's a huge amount of battery projects happening all around the UK. The UK wants to have sort of like 65 gigawatts of energy storage on the grid. I think it's by like 2035 or something silly like
versus that. What would we be at the moment?
We're nowhere near that.
Yeah.
Like orders of magnitude lower.
Yeah.
I don't know what the precise latest figure is within the last few months, but we're like orders of magnitude below that.
Got it.
So and we kind of need that, both for the imagine an area of high pressure comes over the UK for say 3 or 4 days, knocks out all of the wind. How are you going to power the country?
Yeah. You need some backup.
You need some backup. So I think we're actually going to do pretty well in that area.
Yeah. It's one of these things again, right? Like on this podcast and like I guess more generally, like when we think about venture, we're thinking, obviously we talk about climate tech, we talk about energy tech, most people think about venture in terms of kind of household names of software companies, your Facebooks, your Amazons, etc., right? Like consumer facing businesses, a couple of kind of B2B, maybe, with Salesforce or whatever. But actually the interesting thing with energy tech is it impacts all of our lives, right? Like but it impacts our lives to an extent invisibly, right? Like in the home, my daughters don't care where their power is coming from to charge their iPhone. Like they just care that there is power coming through, right? But if we get it right, essentially, then we secure their ability and their kids' ability down the track to have low cost, cheap, efficient, and clean, I guess, energy, which is the other major factor here, right?
Yeah, actually, can I just go on a slight tangent here?
Of course.
Pick up on something that you said that I think is a really good analogy for what's happening in energy.
Yeah.
So at the moment, like a lot of people are talking about like individual solutions.
Yeah.
Batteries, EVs, heat pumps has come up already.
Yeah.
Hydrogen electrolyzers.
Yeah. For your car, for your home.
For this, for that application. And everyone's fighting over what's best at what.
Yeah.
The reality is customers, particularly commercial customers or the likes of me and you, don't really care. Okay? You want heat in this place and electricity in this place, and you just want the cheapest version that's reliable, that meets your reliability requirements.
Yeah.
Okay? It's the same with data centers.
Mm-hmm.
Data centers want extremely high uptime electricity and they want it at the cheapest price. They don't care if it's nuclear, solar, whatever.
Just give it to me and make it
meet my
cheap.
requirements.
Yeah.
The problem is in the moment that like most of the companies out there are trying to flog one solution.
Got it.
And the customers don't know how to procure it. And the analogy here is to what happened in the early days of the internet. You used to have literally a phone line, and then you used to have
You don't look old enough to have used dial-up, to be fair.
I did used to play some games on my dad's laptop and dial-up.
All right. I'll allow that.
Much to his annoyance. It cost him a lot of money.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And then the internet came along.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've got to get laptops, phone lines, you've got to get computers, you've got to have servers. And now all of a sudden, companies who don't know anything about the internet had to procure all this equipment.
Yeah.
They didn't do it themselves.
Yeah.
They went to Oracle and said, here's my specs.
Or HP or whoever. Yeah.
HP, go connect it all together. The same thing is happening now in energy. I know a lot of sort of integrated service providers, effectively, but for energy, who are going to go around and select the appropriate technologies and then deliver energy as a service to the company with sort of certain decarbonisation.
So like aggregator stroke resellers of energy solutions.
Exactly.
So
and that's going to unlock deployment of these clean technologies at scale.
Yeah.
Because now big commercial customers can deploy it across massive sites super quickly.
And they don't need to worry about like how to source it and whether they've got their numbers right. I mean, it's very similar actually to, you talked about the internet. The more kind of recent phenomenon has been probably around office space sourcing, right? Like exactly the same situation. You've now got huge amounts of stock on the market, but you've got companies like Tally and various others that now are providing you with, multiple solutions. You need an office for a day, you need a hot desk, you need, a more flexible lease or whatever. They're now aggregating all of that and providing it out to you. So you just don't have a headache. And frankly, like from a consumer behavior perspective, that's probably the right way to go, right? Because too much choice, as we all know, leads to a lack of decision making, right? Because you have you aren't able to discern or decide for yourself because you're not the expert in the area. I guess over time, what might happen is if those companies start, their margins start looking a little bit egregious, then you will get expert, like especially as demand for energy increases, at some point you're going to be like, okay, well, I need someone who actually understands this in-house in my business to be able to do that. But at the outset, getting up and running, like that's the simplest way to do it. And
you don't want to get fired.
Yeah,
by selecting the wrong technology.
There is also that, but I mean, yeah, I won't go into the detail. I like this is. I had a very large argument with HP when I first started working.
Yeah.
And it was on their supply of equipment to the company that I was working for, and we were disputing some of their charges, and I think I got a little bit hot under the collar, but I was very young, and my bosses were not particularly happy with the fact that I got even though I was right. Of course I was right, but he says. But yes, I mean, no one wants to get fired, but equally no one wants to be sitting with very expensive and incompatible kind of energy to their actual requirements.
Of course.
Right? So we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but I kind of want to go into it a little bit more, right? Because because you're investing very, very specifically in kind of energy, but there is a massive climate angle to this, and it all feels very heavily capital constrained. I mean, you mentioned that, yes, there's Series A, Series B funding, but is that the real issue, or are we kind of matching the wrong capital to the wrong models? Because, you talked about what you see as being venture backable in this space. What isn't venture backable in this space? And why are some parts of climate kind of better suited to government, philanthropy, infrastructure capital? And I guess, where do you as a fund try and play more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, about 50% of the technologies we need to do energy transition already exist. And about 50% still need to be developed, commercialized, and scaled. So the 50% that's already been developed, we just need innovative business models for basically how to roll out and deploy those technologies.
Yeah.
And then you need to get the right capital, like private equity or infrastructure, to be able to back and roll that technology out. Because it's relatively low risk. It's been proven in certain geographies. It just needs to be rolled out for different applications for those specific projects. Yeah. So that's definitely one thing which is happening, and we need to do a lot of. The other side is there are some areas of climate which are very, very hard to solve. Okay, like extremely hard to solve.
For
Cement.
example, cement. Okay.
Decarbonisation is a very difficult one.
Yeah.
Steel decarbonisation.
Yeah.
And another good one is direct air capture is super expensive, and most of the solutions to actually get the cost down are super frontier. And all of the best ideas I've seen in those spaces are even too risky for us as an early stage venture fund.
Got it.
They are like pie in the sky sort of stuff. But often,
not just the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, but maybe off the edge.
it's literally off the edge.
Yeah.
However, to really push the envelope, you need people exploring those ideas.
Yeah.
Because it may not be that specific idea, but by pushing that really difficult piece of research, you may spot another idea.
Yeah.
Right. It's the idea that like, what benefit does the space sector have to the rest of society?
Yeah.
Well, like, it gave you fly-by-wire, it gave you the laser, etc.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big role for that, and that's often where philanthropy plays.
Yeah.
And then we're basically sat in the middle, where we're looking at sort of somewhat de-risked and proven fundamental science with sort of measurable economic impact if we can scale and deploy that, and then we underwrite engineering and scale-up risk.
And because you talked earlier about kind of the incubator that you set up with the various professors, right? Is that a vehicle to potentially home or house some of these more risky technologies, or is that incubator more for the more future backable businesses that you see?
Absolutely. So we our sort of incubator, we actually call it a venture studio.
Yeah.
Well, a venture builder.
Yeah.
We partner basically with entrepreneurs and we'll act as like a co-founder to them.
Okay.
And then we give them access to laboratory space, pre-seed capital, and our full in-house team that helps them do everything from sort of company setup, bank account, financial reporting, the works. In that lab, we will do really nascent ideas coming out of universities. So often there's sort of some sort of experiment on a bench, bit of IP around it or a patent, and we'll basically work with those inventors, be like, how can we commercialize this technology faster? The idea for doing the labs is to basically provide a testing ground to iterate the technology. In software, you can write a bit of code and write a test.
Yeah.
You can do that in a couple of days.
Very hard with hardware, yeah.
Right? With hardware, the lab we've created is you can, in one side of the lab, you build your product, and then we have a testing lab on the other side, and you can test what you built. And you can go back and forth to them, so you can build the hardware and then test it, like you build the code and you test it. So you can iterate much faster. The first company took through this went from a benchtop experiment to a 20 kilowatt electrolyzer in 12 months, which is very fast for hardware. So that gives you a feeling of what we're trying to do there, to sort of reduce the amount of capital you need to sort of test an idea and see if it works.
Yeah, so obviously you do it. I mean, we had someone on who was looking at technology transfer from universities, right? And it's the whole problem that he is trying to solve he worked at CERN and various universities on technology transfer, is how do you get from the gram to the kilogram and from the kilogram to the mass production, right? Like that sounds like what you're essentially doing in the lab, is rather than having to go from, you know, we've managed to send an electron or whatever, right? Like we've created a charge to, okay, this prototype works at small scale, but it's proven that it can scale, and therefore now we can go out and raise the funding or whatever it is to build out the capabilities at a much larger scale, right? But presumably the hurdle for most founders or most inventors in this space, I guess, is not having access to the labs. Is that the biggest limiting factor, or?
I'd say it's one of the factors. I think it's the biggest limiting factor. I mean, let's just take an example here in the UK. There is great lab space for sort of biotech.
Yeah, 100%.
Loads of it.
Yeah.
We really know how to spin out biotech companies and scale them. When we were starting ProSemino, we were talking to a few entrepreneurs, like, do you want to partner together? We'll work and build a company together. And they're like, great, let's do this. Where are we going to build this? And, you know, working out of universities is one way, but universities have to prioritize students over commercial enterprises.
Yeah.
So that does cause some problems. So we went out and looked for lab space. We just wanted to rent them off someone else. Couldn't find any that met our requirements. We looked for 2 years, okay, to find really good ones. And we ended up building our own. Because we didn't have ones that like could take the weight of the equipment or had the ventilation requirements or had enough power. Like some of the sites we're looking at, we actually asked them that you'd have to upgrade your substation to be able to run the test.
I can imagine the looks on their face. But then does that maybe speak to what it is that we have prioritized in terms of research at our universities, right? Because to your point, right? If we have a proliferation of labs in the biospace, that suggests that there is enough research and enough sort of innovation coming out that warrants having that space available. Is it therefore that we've had a deficiency looking at things like energy in the past and therefore haven't caught up to where we could be right now, or is it something else?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think the research, particularly in the UK and actually in the whole of Europe, around batteries, energy, electrochemistry, renewable fuels, materials is phenomenal. Yeah, there's a huge amount of really great research going at some great universities. I think, why is more of that not translated? I think part of it is the ecosystem's still quite young. Yeah, the spin out rate for clean tech companies is like far below biotech. But I think that's a function of, the market's still emerging, the business models and commercialization routes are still emerging. New different parts of the capital stack are popping up. Yeah. I was talking to a fund the other day that set up a new first-of-a-kind financing vehicle. So for financing risky tech in first-of-a-kind projects. Yep. I've heard a new credit fund that is spinning up, helping clean tech credit. I've heard of new Series B funds. We're filling the Series B gap. And so I think that it's a function of the biotech sector is a lot older. Yeah. And this is a relatively younger sector.
And more proven, I guess, yeah.
And emerging. Yeah. There's some amazing innovation. We just need to work to sort of how we get that out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm not trying to be negative, by the way, but, I look around the UK and I'm always sort of wondering, does our ambition meet reality, right? Like, and can we prove that we can really take the ball back? We talk a lot about being, the leading sort of country for AI or whatever, right? Like, and you obviously have at the moment the green agenda and various other things happening, but often it feels like rhetoric over action. And I guess, I'm always slightly skeptical, but it sounds like we're a lot further ahead, or a lot, have recognized, I guess, where the opportunity is as far as the energy space is concerned, and are now kind of trying to tackle that, which I think is amazing. But you've been developing a thesis around kind of energy for the future of compute. So firstly, what does that mean? And I guess as data centers and AI models proliferate, what kind of energy solutions will they demand, right? And could hyperscalers like Meta, Google, AWS become the next kind of big energy acquirers, or even energy providers? Because I think that at the back of my head sort of makes sense, right? If you have massive energy demands, start creating your own energy production, and then selling back onto the grid. So a little bit about, a little bit like your sort of scenario around homes and cities starting to be used as power stations. And then I guess, what role does sovereign energy security play in this whole narrative? And maybe how should venture adapt? I appreciate that's quite a lot in one question.
That is a lot, and it's this could be a whole podcast in itself.
Excellent.
But we'll try and scratch the surface a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's well known, if you're in the AI sphere, that the cost of compute is going to collapse to the cost of energy over time. And the nirvana is, we invent AGI. AGI is powered by fusion. It builds loads of robots, and our entire economy gets automated. And then we as humans can relax and do creative things that make our soul feel good.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay.
With UBI and who knows what else, but yeah.
In any case, the amount of power needed to do all this is unprecedented to what we've seen.
Sure.
And it's growing, just like the example I gave earlier about electricity demand in the US coupling to GDP growth before. Like it's huge. And you can see it as like a real world example, like a tangible benefit between almost like LLMs or machine learning algorithms and benefits in the world, like better products, automated manufacturing that makes better products for people, healthcare, so like people giving themselves therapy rather than have to pay for it. These make them more productive. This is a general impact on the economy. So like, energy is going to also couple to GDP growth. So that's interesting. Now, the demand for, so why is it interesting from a venture perspective? So the deployment cycle for data centers is super fast. I want on-time power right now, so I can make more money quicker. Also, the innovation cycle for GPUs is very fast. It's 9 months. And so you have this huge customer with loads and loads of cash, some of them, wanting to deploy very, very fast.
Well, I mean, bear in mind, NVIDIA just hit 4 trillion market cap, right? Like literally this week. So a lot of them are sitting on a fair amount of cash.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
And now imagine if you've got a piece of technology that you're selling into a data center. Data center is critical for their business. And it's mission critical for their business. Just like in software, they're going to be willing to pay a huge premium for that tech to secure it for their particular critical asset for their whole business. Yeah. So it's both a very fast sales cycle and potentially huge exit multiples. So from a venture perspective, selling technology into that area looks really interesting.
Well, and potentially faster route to DPI than a lot of companies that we're seeing at the moment.
And we have 2 companies, selling products into data centers already. Okay. The tech stack as well needs a lot of work. People are talking mainly about power generation. So like SMRs or nuclear or solar for data centers, but there's a huge amount of other technology that's needed. You need really good energy storage. You need power distribution within the data center. You need monitoring technologies. You need backup power, and a lot of the requirements are unlike anywhere else in the energy sector. The example I give is when you write a bit of text into your chat box and hit send, that then kicks off a massive computational algorithm on the back end. And so the energy demand for a data center can go from 0 to like 100 megawatts like that. There are very few other use cases where energy spikes so quickly, other than when everyone flips their kettles on during the football at halftime. During the World Cup final is a classic case of a similar example. And what that does, that puts huge strain on the technology, because I want my power to go from 0 to 100 megawatts very fast, but I want the power to be super clean and stable. At 999979 reliability. That puts huge requirements on the tech stack. You need to be able to deliver that.
It's bringing me up in a few highs, and the reason for that is, I mean, I worked out in Papua New Guinea for about a decade, and my life was full of brownouts, blackouts, greyouts, and everything in between. It was, we were manufacturers, and stability of power was non-existent, let alone kind of cheap. But it's incredible to think about where we are today. And Papua New Guinea probably is exactly where it was when I left, over 10 years ago now. But I guess one question maybe to kind of tack onto that then is, and tying it back into kind of sovereign energy security as well. How do we get to a point where actually, you said earlier that as you got economies developing, you got emerging middle class, people have energy demands, et cetera. How do we now normalize energy distribution globally? Like, what is happening in India or in sub-Saharan Africa? Are they looking at these sort of solutions, or are they, still so heavily dependent on carbonized fuel, et cetera, that they will only ever play catch up to the West? And then, you talked about issues, potential geopolitical kind of threats. Well, we've had those, right? Like, we all saw energy prices spike 3-4 years ago for reasons that we're all aware of now. So I guess sort of the two questions are: the West seems to be doing one thing, is our emerging economies catching up? And then secondly, within all of this, and if you are seeing massive spikes in demand and so on, what does that mean for sovereign energy security? Because that feels like a vulnerability as well, right? Like, I mean, all it takes then is for someone to, hamper supply to one area, and you could quite literally shut off, very, very core infrastructure for large parts of the West. So
the optimistic view, which I share, although there is a pessimistic view, to what's happening in basically the global South, is, I think, a huge amount of collaboration. Mm-hmm. So I saw a diagram once of the solar irradiation across the planet.
Yeah.
And then someone overlaid on it wind speeds, like a heat map of wind speeds. So where was higher wind speeds was higher hotspots, and then created an aggregate of the two. And the areas that lit up on there, places like Morocco, Chile, the Middle East, those are going to be the new energy superpowers of the future.
Interesting.
Because they have a lot of land, often.
And
they have
wind,
amazing
and heat.
Yeah, land, wind, and heat.
Yeah.
Okay.
But sunlight.
Some of those countries, and many of them, don't have the technology, skill, infrastructure, workforce to be able to actually monetize that asset.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is there's huge amount of investment from the West into the global South. I know many, many big funds that are investing purely in the global South. And then it's great for those countries, because then they can develop infrastructure, they get investment come in, jobs, and then they can look to export a lot of that power and create new export industries for their countries. So the global South is going to be absolutely critical to this energy transition. It can't be ignored.
Yeah. So the point being, though, when you think about sort of sovereign energy, so as an example, Europe is a net importer today. How do we secure ourselves better? Right, because if we're so reliant on external energy production, whether it's a global South, whether it's Russia, whether it's the Middle East for fossil fuels, what can we do better? I guess is my question. How do we make sure we're not so dependent?
I'm probably going to sound like a broken record.
Yeah, wind,
but
solar,
electrification, renewables is one of the greatest levers. For doing that. I mean, net import of energy. We have a huge reliance of imported gas. It's interesting. The UK and Europe are actually a swing state on the natural gas market. So we have often outbid other countries in the gas market, and then they've had to burn coal instead of buying gas.
Wow.
So because of how important it is for our economy.
Yeah.
So one of the best ways to push imported gas out of, say, the UK market is to build more things like renewables and energy storage. That would reduce our reliance on it. We need to do a few other things, like there's a lot of calls for reform of the electricity market in the UK.
That seems to be a narrative that's been going for about 2 decades.
It needs to be fixed at some point.
Yeah.
It's not great.
Yeah.
But I'm confident that we'll eventually get there. But yeah, unfortunately, that is, as far as I can see, the best way to do it.
Okay. As we kind of wrap up the podcast, a couple of sort of slightly energy related questions, although you may answer either of them with an energy related answer. So what is one thing where you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of your life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
I don't think it's super contrarian, but I believe in it so deeply, I'll say it.
Yeah, sure.
I think emotional education is one of the most important levers in making humans more happy and productive. We just are never, ever in our lives, education through our parents, taught how to deal with our own emotions or emotions of others. And it leads to a huge amount of suffering. Everyone in life will experience tragedy. And even the smallest outside tragedy can be extremely painful for that person, like breaking up with your first partner.
Yeah.
I've seen it, debilitate my friends for months.
I saw it debilitate my daughter for probably
exactly
several months. Yeah.
And often what people do is they go through soul searching and they learn it, through multiple times of being hurt.
Yeah.
What instead of like band-aiding it up, what if we could give them the cure? Prevention is better than cure.
Yeah.
What if we could prevent it and give them the tools to be able to deal with it so they could suffer less? You made everyone sort of 1% less anxious or 5%, reduce the time that they suffer by 5%. Everyone would be happier, more productive. They'd have better relationships. If I wasn't working in energy, I'd be working in emotional education.
I think that's awesome. One of the first startup I ever, when I came back to the UK, the first startup I worked in was it was an Eton College-backed startup, so it was slightly different to the norm. But it was selling soft skills training to high school students, predominantly in China. But obviously within that, emotional intelligence was a core pillar. Now that's slightly different to what you're talking about, but I think that whole area of soft skills is one that is massively underestimated. In all of our traditional education systems, right? I think there's, so my kids went through the IB International Baccalaureate. I think they're slightly better at potentially teaching some of this stuff. But to your point, I think if you equip children and adults for that matter, with the tools, as you say, to be able to handle their emotions, not ignore them, because that's exactly the wrong response, right? But to handle their emotions and understand how to work through them in a much better way. I agree. You'd probably see less suffering. And I think what you'd also find is you'd have, far more empathy amongst people, which I think at the moment, certainly online seems to be lacking a little bit. And maybe actually so that leads in quite nicely into my final question, which is, so that we can get to know the real you. What is something that moves you the most emotionally?
I don't think I've ever said this out loud, but might as well.
First for the podcast.
I'm an engineer, and I've been taught a lot in my life to think. I think a lot. Even though I do a lot of extroverted stuff, I'm an introvert at heart. I get energy from reading, doing calculations, studying investments. I just love it. And I use my prefrontal cortex a huge amount. And so when I was growing up as a kid, I really hated literature. Didn't like reading that much, although I like reading about science, but didn't like stories and literature or poetry. But recently, some of my most moving moments have been reading poetry. And I really like this one poet, a guy called David White. And I've actually teared up on multiple occasions. And as I thought about it, and I think it goes back to what we were just talking about with emotional education. My analogy here is I think poetry is one of the best tools for bridging the thinking brain and the thinking and feeling. So bridging the head and the heart. And I think it's one of the best ways to turn thought into feeling. when you've got a problem, it's very hard to think your way through it. You have to feel your way through it. Like if you're suffering from something or some heartache, and poetry is a good way to sort of help your thinking brain connect to your feeling brain.
I think that's wonderful. And as someone who is a poet, has been a poet. I will send you my Medium page, and you can have a flick through.
Yes, please. I'd love to.
You may find some of it quite interesting. No, look, I mean, again, I actually, it's interesting because I'm kind of the flip of that, which is I'm not very good with. I believe I have ADHD. I'm not going to get myself tested because I don't really see the point. But my prefrontal cortex is a bit of a mess. But I spent all of my youth reading literature. Like I could read for days. I did, I then went on to study sort of speech and drama for 12 years as well. And so for me, that's my happy place. And I really hated kind of technical or non-fiction writing until I was probably in my early mid-20s, at which point I started picking up more non-fictional and predominantly business-orientated books. But that what it taught me, actually, what the fictional writing taught me, was that if you find the right kind of non-fictional writing, it can be just as immersive as fictional writing, and vice versa, right? So some of the best books I've read have been non-fictional. I mean, one of them, which I'm sure many of the audience will have already read, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, it's just like an incredible piece, incredible piece of writing. And he really does weave the narrative of the difficulties that he faced as a founder throughout that book. And then, that then in turn got me into philosophy, and it got me into, at the moment I'm noodling on neuroscience just for no reason in particular. But to go back to your point, massive advocate for poetry. I think, exactly as you say, it's something that can bridge the gap between your heart and your mind. But also, I think a lot of, when you read really good poetry, the subtlety of the stories that are told and the narrative that is told within that poetry is so layered, right? That you can go back to it again and again and find different meaning. But I think that's absolutely lovely, and I'm very happy that you shared that with us. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I think this has been like a really incredibly wide-ranging conversation. For our audience, where's the best place for them to find you online? You're on LinkedIn, you're on Twitter X, or where can they find you?
LinkedIn is the best place.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I might stop asking this question, because frankly, like, everyone in the UK is on LinkedIn and hardly anyone's on Twitter. And everyone in the US, it's the other way around. But look, Marcus, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and thank you for joining me in the studio.
It was super fun. Thanks for having me.